September 1940, Kent countryside. A lone farmer stood in his barn with nothing but a wooden chute and 4 minutes to live. 9 Wehrmacht soldiers were crossing his field, rifles raised, boots crushing his autumn wheat. His wife and children hid in the cellar below. The local home guard wouldn't arrive for 20 minutes. Standard doctrine said, surrender, hide, flee. Thomas Blackwell did none of these. What happened next defied every military manual the Germans had studied, and it started with the stupidest modification his neighbors had ever mocked him for building. 3:47 p.m., 17th September 1940, Blackwell Farm, Ashford, Kent. The air smelled of cordite and burning wheat. Thomas Blackwell pressed his calloused palm against the barn's interior wall, feeling the structure tremble as another Luftwaffe bomber roared overhead toward London. Through the gaps in the weathered timber, he watched 9 field-grey uniforms moving in tactical formation across his property. Advanced scouts from a downed reconnaissance plane, desperate, armed, and searching for transport or hostages. The 52-year-old farmer had 30 seconds before they reached his barn. His Lee Enfield rifle hung useless on the wall. He'd fired his last 5 rounds at a fox 3 weeks ago and couldn't get ammunition with the rationing. His pitchfork leaned against the hay bales. His hands were shaking. Britain was losing. Everyone knew it, though Churchill's voice on the wireless insisted otherwise. Dunkirk had been a miracle only because 338,000 men fleeing for their lives qualified as success now. The Blitz had turned London into a nightly inferno. Invasion barges massed across the Channel. Kent, Hellfire Corner, absorbed daily bombardment. Blackwell had pulled 3 incendiary bombs from his fields in the past month alone. His farm had become a frontline position he'd never volunteered for. The local home guard consisted of 17 men over 50 with 12 rifles between them, meeting Tuesday evenings in the village hall to practice formations they'd never use. The nearest army unit was stationed 8 miles away. Response time, 25 minutes minimum. His telephone line had been cut by shrapnel 2 days ago. Blackwell's strategic vulnerability was absolute. Isolated farmstead, single middle-aged civilian, no military training, minimal weapons, against 9 professional soldiers carrying carabiner 98K rifles with bayonets fixed. Standard Wehrmacht doctrine for occupied territory. Secure buildings, neutralize resistance, establish temporary strongpoint. Expected survival time for civilian resistance, approximately 90 seconds. But Thomas Blackwell possessed something the Germans didn't account for: intimate 3-dimensional knowledge of every inch of his property, including the barn modification his brother-in-law had called the stupidest bloody thing I've ever seen you build, the Chute. In 1938, before anyone seriously believed war would come again, Blackwell had rebuilt his hayloft using an unorthodox design borrowed from a Canadian agricultural journal. Traditional British barns use ladders or exterior pulley systems to move hay bales from the loft to the ground floor. Blackwell's design incorporated a steep wooden chute, essentially a 12-foot slide enclosed on 3 sides, running from the loft, opening down to the main floor at a 45-degree angle. His reasoning: easier to slide heavy hay bales down than carry them on ladders. His neighbor's assessment: waste of timber, dangerous, impractical, typical of Thomas's odd ideas. The local carpenter had refused to build it, calling it a child's slide, not proper farm equipment. Blackwell had constructed it himself over 3 weekends, using reclaimed oak planks from a demolished mill. The chute sat in the barn's northeast corner, barely visible in the dim light. Its interior surface was worn smooth from 2 years of hay bales sliding down. The loft opening sat directly above, accessible by a ladder built into the wall. The chute's exit pointed toward the main barn doors. The moment of decision arrived at 3:48 p.m. German voices outside, sharp commands in a language Blackwell didn't speak but whose tone he recognized. Tactical, efficient, professional. Boot steps crunching on gravel. The barn doors wouldn't hold if they kicked hard. Catherine, his wife, and their two children, Emily, 9, and James, 7, were in the cellar beneath the farmhouse 40 yards away. He'd ordered them there when he'd first spotted the parachutes coming down over the ridge. The cellar had a hidden entrance beneath the kitchen pantry, a holdover from his grandfather's smuggling days in the 1880s. The Germans would find it eventually if they searched systematically, but it would buy minutes. Every second he delayed them in the barn was a second closer to potential rescue. The home guard was mustering. Someone would have heard the gunfire from the downed plane. But 20 minutes was an eternity in tactical time. Standard civilian response: hide in the loft, hope they don't search thoroughly, pray. Standard outcome: discovery, interrogation, possible execution if they deemed him a partisan. His family would be next. Blackwell made his calculation in less than 3 seconds. Hide and hope, 20% survival probability. Fight with pitchfork, 1% survival probability. But there was a third option, born from 2 years of watching hay bales slide down that ridiculous chute, gathering momentum, hitting the barn floor with enough force to crack planks. The physics Blackwell understood intuitively. A 70-pound hay bale dropped from the loft hit the ground floor at approximately 15 mpm after 12 feet of fall. When channeled down the chute's smooth 45-degree angle, the same bale exited at nearly 22 mph, with all that momentum focused in a single direction. The chute's enclosed sides prevented lateral dispersion. The bale became a projectile. He'd once accidentally knocked himself unconscious when a bale he'd pushed carelessly down the chute had ricocheted off the floor and struck him in the chest. He'd woken up 3 minutes later with bruised ribs and a newfound respect for kinetic energy. What if instead of 70-pound hay bales, he used objects massed specifically for impact? The barn contained 43 hay bales, 17 sacks of grain, 50 pounds each, 8 milk churns, empty, 12 pounds each, full, 42 pounds. 1 cast-iron plough wheel, 85 pounds, assorted farm tools, 3 wooden crates filled with root vegetables, and 1 Thomas Blackwell, 163 pounds, desperate. The barn doors shuddered. German fist-pounding wood. Shouted demand, "Öffnen Sie die Tür!" Blackwell sprinted to the ladder, ascending to the loft in 5 seconds. His heart hammered. His hands found the first hay bale in the darkness. Below, he heard the barn doors splinter open, voices echoing in the cavernous space. Torch beams sweeping the shadows. 9 soldiers entering a space they presumed safe, expecting at most a frightened farmer with raised hands. Thomas Blackwell shoved the first 70-pound hay bale into the chute's opening, angling it carefully. Gravity took hold. The bale accelerated down the smooth oak surface, building speed, exiting the chute at approximately 22 mph, aimed directly at the barn's main entrance, where tactical doctrine demanded the Germans enter in file formation to clear the space systematically. The Battle of Blackwell Farm commenced at 3:49 p.m. It would last exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. 3:49 p.m. Blackwell Farm barn interior, temperature 14 degrees C, visibility poor, dust, dim light. The first hay bale hit Obergefreiter Klaus Zimmermann in the center of his chest as he stepped through the barn's entrance, rifle raised, torch sweeping left. 70 pounds, traveling at 22 mph, delivered approximately 840 joules of kinetic energy, equivalent to being struck by a motorcycle traveling 15 mph. Zimmermann's sternum cracked. He flew backward 3 feet, colliding with Gefreiter Hans Meyer behind him. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs and rifles clattering on stone. 7 Germans still standing, confusion rippling through their tactical formation, torch beams swinging wildly, searching for the threat. Someone shouting, "Hinterhalt! Ambush!" Blackwell's hands were already shoving the second bale into the chute. No time to think, no time for fear. Pure mechanical action born from 30 years of farm labor. Grip, lift, push, release. The bale tumbled into the darkness, oak planks humming with friction. This one struck Gefreiter Meyer as he struggled to stand, catching him on the left shoulder. The impact spun him sideways. His torch flew from his hands, beam cartwheeling across the barn's interior, creating strobing shadows that destroyed the Germans' visual comprehension of the space. The Germans' tactical problem: invisible enemy, unconventional weapon, enclosed kill zone. Wehrmacht infantry doctrine for barn clearing: enter in staggered formation, secure corners, neutralize resistance with concentrated rifle fire. Doctrine assumed resistance would be human combatants, conventional weapons, rifles, grenades, perhaps a hidden machine gun, predictable behavior patterns. Doctrine did not account for agricultural equipment weaponized through gravity and geometry, attacks originating from vertical angles impossible to cover while maintaining forward advance, projectiles that produced no muzzle flash or sound signature to target, a defender who understood the three-dimensional space with complete intimacy. Feldwebel Ernst Kruger, squad leader, veteran of Poland and France, 28 years old, Iron Cross, second class, made his first command decision. Hinlegen, Deckung, get down, take cover. His men dropped prone, seeking shelter behind hay bales, feed troughs, anything solid. It was tactically sound. It was also exactly wrong for this specific environment. Blackwell, watching from the loft, saw them go prone, smiled grimly. Hay bales work against rifle fire. Hay bales do not work against 85 pounds of cast-iron plough wheel dropped from 12 feet up, channeled down a chute aimed at ground-level positions. Third projectile, one milk churn, 42 pounds, filled with rainwater from the trough outside. Blackwell had spent 15 precious seconds filling it, understanding instinctively that mass times velocity equals impact. The churn entered the chute with a metallic scrape, accelerated, exited at the precise angle Blackwell had calculated through 2 years of unconscious observation. Gefreiter Otto Klein, prone behind a feed trough, heard the metallic sound approaching. Looked up. The milk churn struck his helmet's crown, denting the steel, driving the helmet's liner into his skull. He collapsed unconscious. His rifle fired reflexively, bullet punching through the barn's roof. Wasted shot into empty sky. 6 Germans, combat effective. Panic spreading, Kruger screaming commands, trying to restore order. Someone fired blind into the loft. 3 shots, wild, hitting roof timbers. Wood splinters showered down. Blackwell threw himself flat, heart hammering. The return fire forced recalculation. They'd identified his position. Next burst would be more accurate. He had perhaps 10 seconds before they organized suppressing fire. The environmental factors working in Blackwell's favor. The barn's interior was a maze of vertical supports, horizontal beams, hay bales stacked irregularly, farm equipment casting chaotic shadows. The Germans' torches created more confusion than illumination. Every beam of light produced 6 new shadows, each potentially concealing threats. The dust, kicked up by falling projectiles, hung in the air, reducing visibility to less than 3 meters in places. The loft's position 12 feet up created a vertical angle impossible to cover effectively while prone. To aim at Blackwell required sitting or standing, exposing oneself to the next projectile. The barn's acoustics distorted sound. Every scrape, every footstep, every shouted command echoed off timber walls, making it impossible to pinpoint locations. Most critically, the Germans were trained for tactical combat, not industrial accidents. Their minds categorized threats as enemy soldiers, grenades, booby traps, artillery. A 70-pound hay bale sliding down a wooden chute at 22 mph did not register as weapon in their threat assessment protocols. Each impact produced cognitive dissonance. Their training screamed impossible while their eyes watched comrades fall. Blackwell's physical condition, deteriorating, hands bleeding from splinters and rope burns, right shoulder aching from shoving 100-pound objects repeatedly. Breath coming in ragged gasps. He was 52 years old, in farmer-fit condition, but not combat-fit. Sweat stinging his eyes, dust coating his throat, triggering coughing fits he had to suppress to avoid revealing his exact position. But 30 years of farm labor had built specific adaptations. grip strength capable of holding struggling sheep, back muscles accustomed to lifting feed sacks, cardiovascular endurance from walking miles daily, and most importantly, the psychological capacity to continue brutal physical work despite exhaustion, pain, and fear. Fourth projectile, 50-pound grain sack, burlap reinforced with twine. Blackwell had tied it specifically to prevent rupture. The sack entered the chute, tumbling end over end, exiting in an unpredictable trajectory. It struck one of the vertical support beams, ricocheted, and hit Gefreiter Paul Richter in the lower back. As he attempted to reposition, Richter's spine compressed. He screamed, high animal sound of genuine agony, 5 combat effective, morale breaking. 3:51 p.m. 2 minutes elapsed. Home Guard estimated arrival, 18 minutes. Kruger made his second command decision. Rouse! Rouse! Withdraw, regroup outside, burn the barn with grenades, kill whoever runs out. It was tactically sound. His men began crawling toward the exit, maintaining low profiles, covering each other's withdrawal. Blackwell saw the retreat beginning. Panic spiked. If they withdrew, reorganized and surrounded the barn, he lost every advantage. The loft had no alternate exit. They'd burn him out or starve him out. His family's hiding place would be discovered. He needed them inside, needed them confused, injured, terrified, needed 4 more minutes. Fifth projectile, the plow wheel, 85 pounds of cast iron, centuries-old design, indestructible. Blackwell rolled it to the chute's edge, positioned it carefully, released. The wheel entered the chute differently than the other objects. Its circular shape and mass created a thunderous metallic roar as it descended, building speed, iron rims scraping oak planks, sparks visible in the darkness. The sound alone caused 2 Germans to freeze mid-crawl. The wheel exploded from the chute's exit at nearly 25 mi, bounced once on the stone floor, and rolled with devastating momentum directly into Gefreiter Anton Weber's legs as he crawled toward safety. Both tibias snapped. Weber's scream joined Richter's, a chorus of agony that shattered the remaining Germans' psychological cohesion. 4 combat effective, terror replacing discipline. Feldwebel Kruger, veteran of 2 campaigns, decorated for valor, recognized the signs. His squad was breaking. In another 30 seconds they'd rout, abandon weapons, flee blindly, become individually vulnerable targets. He needed to restore control through example. He stood upright, rifle raised, torch sweeping the loft, exposing himself completely. Zeig dich, Feigling! Show yourself, coward! His voice carried authority, challenge, tradition. He was daring the enemy to face him properly, soldier to soldier. Thomas Blackwell, crouched in the loft's shadows, met the challenge with the most British response imaginable. He picked up a wooden crate containing 43 pounds of potatoes, lifted it overhead, and threw it down the chute like a man disposing of rubbish. The crate disintegrated on impact with Kruger's position, potatoes exploding outward like shrapnel, the wooden frame striking Kruger's rifle, knocking it from his hands, splinters driving into his face. He went down, blinded temporarily, authority shattered. 3:52 p.m. 3 minutes elapsed. 3 Germans still combat effective, but effective was generous. They were injured, terrified, leaderless, trapped in a space that killed them with agricultural equipment. Every sound might be another projectile. Every shadow might conceal another absurd, impossible threat. They broke. All 3 simultaneously. No communication required. Pure animal instinct. Flee. They scrambled toward the barn doors, abandoning formation, discipline, wounded comrades, everything. Blackwell had anticipated this, had prepared for this. His hands found the rope attached to the barn's main pulley system, the traditional mechanism for lifting hay bales, which he'd never fully removed, despite building the chute. 30 feet of thick hemp rope, designed to lift 300 pounds. He yanked hard. The rope's far end, attached to a counterweight of rocks in a burlap sack, released. The sack dropped, the pulley reversed. and the barn's side door, the alternate exit the fleeing Germans were running toward, slammed shut as the rope's mechanical advantage pulled it closed with enough force to crack the frame. The three Germans collided with the suddenly closed door. Momentum carried them into the timber. Stunned, they turned back toward the main entrance, the only remaining exit, where Thomas Blackwell had positioned his final projectile, himself. He descended the ladder in 3 seconds, not climbing down but essentially falling in controlled stages, hands barely touching rungs. His boots hit stone, his hands grabbed the pitchfork leaning against the wall, and he stepped into the torchbeam's light. 3:53 p.m., barn main floor, 30 seconds until German tactical collapse. 3 Wehrmacht soldiers, Gefreiter Helmut Strauss, Gefreiter Ludwig Becker, Gefreiter Franz Werner, faced a 52-year-old British farmer holding a 4-tined pitchfork in a 2-handed grip. Behind them, their squad lay broken. 3 unconscious, 3 incapacitated with serious injuries, their Feldwebel temporarily blinded by potato crate shrapnel, 2 more still stunned from the initial impacts. Standard tactical assessment suggested this should resolve in seconds. 3 armed soldiers with rifles versus 1 aging civilian with an agricultural tool. Expected outcome: civilian surrenders or dies. But tactical assessments require functional psychology. These 3 men had spent 4 minutes experiencing impossible defeat, attacked by vegetables, wounded by dairy equipment, routed by gravity. Their training screamed that this couldn't happen. Their reality proved otherwise. The cognitive dissonance destroyed their decision-making capacity. Strauss raised his rifle first, barrel swinging toward Blackwell's center mass. His finger found the trigger. Standard Wehrmacht Karabiner 98K, effective range 500 meters, 5-round magazine, bolt-action mechanism capable of 15 aimed shots per minute in trained hands. Distance to target, 4 meters, impossible to miss. He missed. Not because Blackwell moved, though he did, stepping laterally toward cover, but because Strauss's hands were shaking so violently, the barrel wavered 30 degrees off target. The shot punched through the barn wall 6 feet left of Blackwell's position. The bolt actions clack-clack as Strauss cycled the next round sounded like breaking bones in the echoing space. Becker and Werner fired simultaneously, crossfire pattern, by-the-book suppression. Both shots went high. Not from incompetence, but from psychological fracture. Their bodies refused to function correctly because their minds couldn't process how they'd lost 6 comrades to farm equipment. Blackwell didn't wait for them to recover. He closed the 4 meters in 2 seconds, farmer's stride, accustomed to covering muddy fields quickly. The pitchfork's tines caught Strauss's rifle barrel, twisting it sideways using leverage Blackwell had learned wrestling sheep out of ditches. The rifle fired again, wild shot into the floor. Blackwell's follow-through drove the pitchfork's wooden handle into Strauss's solar plexus. The German doubled over, wind knocked out, rifle clattering down. 5 combat effective became 4. Becker attempted bayonet technique, textbook Wehrmacht close-quarters doctrine, low guard position, thrust toward abdomen, withdraw and repeat. He executed it perfectly. Against a trained soldier, it would have succeeded. Thomas Blackwell had spent 30 years jabbing pitchforks into hay bales, learning instinctively how thrust vectors worked, where force needed to be applied, how to redirect incoming momentum. He parried Becker's bayonet thrust with the pitchfork's handle, stepped inside the German's reach, and used his greater weight, farm muscle versus soldier endurance, to drive Becker backward into the barn wall. Becker's helmet struck timber with a hollow thunk, his eyes unfocused. 4 became 3. Werner, last man standing of the retreat group, made the intelligent decision. He ran. Not toward the main entrance where Blackwell stood, but toward the side door, the one Blackwell had slammed shut with the pulley rope. Werner hit the door with his shoulder, desperation lending strength. The door's cracked frame gave way. Werner stumbled into the farmyard's grey afternoon light. Blackwell let him go. One terrorized German running across Kent countryside screaming about killer barns was exactly the psychological warfare Britain needed. 3:54 p.m. 4 minutes elapsed. Barn secured. 9 Wehrmacht soldiers had entered. 6 lay incapacitated inside. 3 unconscious, 3 with serious injuries, including fractured bones and spinal damage. 2 more were stunned, winded. 1 had fled. 0 had completed their tactical objective. Blackwell's casualties: splinters, rope burns, severely strained shoulder, psychological trauma that wouldn't manifest fully for 3 weeks. He stood in the barn's entrance, pitchfork still gripped, white-knuckled, chest heaving, watching Werner's field-grey uniform disappear over the ridge. Behind him, German voices groaned in pain. Somewhere in the distance, a vehicle engine approached. Home Guard finally arriving 18 minutes late, finding the battle already finished. The German intelligence analysis, September 18, 1940. The after-action report filed by the sole surviving combat-effective German from the reconnaissance patrol, Gefreiter Franz Werner, created immediate confusion at Wehrmacht intelligence headquarters in occupied Calais. Werner's account described coordinated defensive position, multiple concealed combatants, sophisticated improvised weapons, possible Home Guard ambush unit using unorthodox tactics. His commanding officer, Major Klaus Reinhardt, read the report 3 times. The mathematics didn't function. 9 trained soldiers defeated in 4 minutes with 0 enemy casualties, using weapons described as sliding hay projectiles and aggressive root vegetables. It sounded like shell shock. It sounded like excuse-making. It sounded impossible. But 6 soldiers remained in British custody, with injuries consistent with high-velocity blunt trauma. Kruger, evacuated 2 days later in a prisoner exchange for medical treatment, confirmed the essential details while omitting the most humiliating specifics. Wehrmacht medical examiners documented fractured sternum, cracked ribs, spinal compression, broken tibias, concussion trauma, injury patterns inconsistent with small arms combat, consistent with industrial accidents. The cognitive problem. German military doctrine in 1940 was built on experiences from the Great War and refined through Poland and France campaigns. It assumed technological superiority, tactical innovation, speed and concentration of force. It had defeated the French army, considered Europe's finest, in 6 weeks. It had rolled through Poland in 4 weeks. It had conquered Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg. The doctrine assumed enemies would fight using recognizable methods: trenches, tanks, artillery, conventional infantry tactics. It could adapt to unexpected resistance, the Maginot Line, the British Expeditionary Force's rearguard actions. But those were variations on familiar themes. A single British farmer defending his property using agricultural physics represented something outside the Wehrmacht's conceptual framework. Not because it was sophisticated, it was absurdly simple, but because it violated every assumption about how civilians behaved under occupation. Doctrine said civilians flee, hide, or collaborate. Civilians don't weaponize their own infrastructure. Civilians don't study their enemy's tactical doctrine and identify exploitable weaknesses. Major Reinhardt's final assessment, classified and circulated to senior officers, recommend extreme caution in isolated farmstead operations throughout Kent region. British civilian resistance psychology appears fundamentally different from French, Polish, or Norwegian patterns. Presume concealed defenses, improvised weapons, and willingness to engage superior forces. Home Guard capabilities significantly underestimated. Recommend operational postponement of Seelöwe, Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, pending further intelligence. What Reinhardt couldn't write in official reports. The British were fighting with a psychological weapon the Wehrmacht couldn't counter. They were defending their actual homes. Not homeland as abstract concept, but the specific farm where 3 generations had lived, the specific barn where specific children had played, the specific fields where specific sweat had been poured into soil. The emotional mathematics produced defenders who didn't calculate survival odds rationally. German soldiers were fighting for ideology, fatherland, duty, camaraderie. British farmers were fighting for the pantry where their grandmothers' preserves still sat in jars, for the bedroom where their children slept, for the fields that bore their family name. The Wehrmacht could match rifle against rifle, tank against tank, plane against plane. It couldn't match that specific desperation. September 20th, 1940, Blackwell Farm. Thomas Blackwell stood in his barn, now notorious throughout German reconnaissance units as the Kent killing box, and surveyed the repairs needed. The main doors required new hinges. 3 roof planks needed replacing where wild shots had punched through. Bloodstains marked the floor where Germans had lain injured for 20 minutes before Home Guard medics arrived. The chute remained undamaged. Blackwell ran his hand along its smooth oak surface, feeling the wear patterns from 2 years of hay bales, now legendary among Kent Home Guard units as Blackwell's Revenge, or the stupidest bloody brilliant thing in British agricultural history. Local Defence Volunteer Lieutenant Colonel Archibald Weatherby had visited the day after, touring the barn, examining the chute's mechanics, taking measurements. His official report to Southern Command recommended immediate documentation and potential tactical adaptation of civilian improvised defence structures. Blackwell Farmstead represents proof of concept for area denial using environmental knowledge and physics. His unofficial comment to Blackwell, delivered over tea in the farmhouse kitchen while Catherine bandaged Thomas's rope-burned hands. Good Lord, man. If we'd known you could do this with farm equipment, we'd have issued pitchforks at Dunkirk. The tactical innovation spreading quietly. Within 2 weeks, 17 farms across Kent had modified their barns following Blackwell's unintentional blueprint. Not identical copies, each farmer adapted the concept to their specific architecture, but sharing common principles. Vertical advantage, improvised projectiles, environmental intimacy, psychological shock value. Wehrmacht reconnaissance units began avoiding isolated farmsteads entirely, reporting them as potentially defended positions, requiring armoured support to clear safely. This was strategic victory. 9 soldiers and 4 minutes had convinced German planners that British countryside was more dangerous than it actually was. The truth was simpler and more British. One terrified father protecting his family, using whatever came to hand, refusing to accept defeat because acceptance meant losing everything. Churchill's speeches talked about fighting on beaches, landing grounds, fields, streets. Thomas Blackwell fought on his farm with his chute, using physics and desperation, and that peculiarly British refusal to acknowledge when you're supposed to lose. October 1940, through war's end. The ripple effects of 4 minutes. The Battle of Britain's outcome was decided by Spitfires and Hurricanes, by radar stations and fighter commands' tactical brilliance, by the few who held the skies against overwhelming Luftwaffe numbers. Official histories record, Germany lost the air superiority required for invasion. Hitler postponed and eventually cancelled Operation Sea Lion. Britain survived its closest brush with conquest. Official histories don't mention Thomas Blackwell's barn chute, but strategic planning documents from Wehrmacht intelligence archives, captured in 1945 and declassified decades later, reveal something remarkable. The psychological impact of small-scale civilian resistance operations in Kent during September-October 1940 contributed to Germany's assessment that British home defence capabilities were more sophisticated than actual numbers suggested. One classified memo from Generaloberst Franz Halder, Chief of the German Army General Staff, dated October 3, 1940. Intelligence reports from reconnaissance operations in southeastern England indicate unexpectedly organised civilian defence structures. Multiple incidents of patrol units encountering improvised defensive positions in areas presumed undefended. Casualty ratios in isolated engagements unfavourable. British Home Guard effectiveness substantially higher than initial estimates. Recommend Sea Lion postponement pending winter. Invasion environment assessment requires revision. Blackwell's farm was one data point among many, but data points accumulate. 9 soldiers injured by farm equipment, plus 17 similar incidents across Kent, plus dozens of reconnaissance patrols reporting unexpected resistance. A pattern suggesting Britain's civilian defence was far more robust than reality. The truth: Britain in September 1940 was desperately vulnerable. The British Army had evacuated from Dunkirk, leaving most heavy equipment behind. Coastal defences were incomplete. The Home Guard, rebranded from Local Defence Volunteers in July, numbered 1.5 million men, but possessed approximately 600,000 rifles total, plus improvised weapons, pitchforks, shotguns, Molotov cocktails. Against 3 Wehrmacht divisions landing with armour support, Britain's ground defences would have lasted days, perhaps weeks. But Germany didn't know that with certainty. Intelligence is probability assessment, not absolute knowledge. Every anomalous data point, like 9 soldiers defeated in 4 minutes by a farmer, increases uncertainty. Uncertainty delays decision-making. Delay grants time. Time allowed RAF Fighter Command to continue attriting Luftwaffe bomber strength, allowed coastal defences to strengthen, allowed American aid to arrive, allowed weather to deteriorate toward winter storm season that made amphibious invasion catastrophically risky. Did Thomas Blackwell's 4 minutes change history? No. Did those 4 minutes contribute infinitesimally to creating the intelligence uncertainty that contributed marginally to Germany's decision to postpone invasion, which granted Britain time to survive until America entered the war? Possibly, unmeasurably, but possibly. Post-war, 1945-1989. Thomas Blackwell returned to farming after his brief, involuntary military engagement. No medals were awarded. Officially, the engagement was classified as civilian police action, and records were sealed under Defence of the Realm regulations. The Home Guard lieutenant colonel who'd visited wrote a commendation that disappeared into bureaucratic archives. Blackwell's children, Emily and James, grew up knowing their father had done something during the war, but receiving only vague details. The barn's chute remained functional, used for its original purpose: sliding hay bales. Blackwell never modified it further, never discussed the 4 minutes except once, briefly, when a local journalist asked in 1955 about wartime experiences. His response: "I defended my farm. Any man would have done the same." Interview ended. Catherine Blackwell knew more, knew that Thomas woke screaming twice a week for 3 months after September 17th. Knew he couldn't enter the barn without trembling for a year afterward. Knew he'd killed no one. The Germans had survived, been treated by British medics, became prisoners of war, most eventually repatriated, but had broken 9 men using agricultural equipment, and that breaking carried psychological cost. 1989, declassification and rediscovery. The British government's 50-year declassification rule released Second World War home defence documents in 1989-1991. A military historian named Dr. Margaret Thornton, researching Home Guard operations, found Lieutenant Colonel Weatherby's original report about improvised defensive structures in Kent, September 1940. The report referenced Blackwell Farmstead, Ashford, with architectural diagrams of the barn chute. Dr. Thornton visited Blackwell Farm in 1990. Thomas had died in 1982, age 94. Catherine was still alive, 91 years old, living with her daughter Emily in the old farmhouse. The barn still stood, chute intact. Catherine showed Dr. Thornton the barn, explaining what Thomas had finally told her in 1979 after 39 years of silence. The fear, the desperation, the physics he'd understood intuitively, the sounds of injured men groaning while he'd waited for help to arrive. Catherine's testimony, combined with declassified German reports and Weatherby's documentation, allowed Dr. Thornton to reconstruct the engagement's details. Her academic paper, published in Journal of Modern British History, 1992, Improvised Defence in the Battle of Britain, Civilian Resistance and Psychological Warfare in Kent, 1940. Blackwell's 4 minutes occupied 3 pages. The paper's conclusion emphasized, strategic impact of civilian resistance operations lies not in tactical outcomes, but in cumulative psychological effect on enemy intelligence assessment and decision-making confidence. The British cultural integration. Blackwell's story entered British historical consciousness slowly, through academic channels first, then popular history books, eventually BBC documentaries. It appealed to specific British sensibilities, the amateur defeating the professional, improvisation triumphing over doctrine, the little man standing against overwhelming force, using nothing but wits and what's at hand. It became another piece of Britain's self-mythology around 1940, the Blitz spirit, Dunkirk's little ships, Churchill's speeches, fighter commands never in the field of human conflict. Blackwell's barn chute fit perfectly, proof that ordinary people, in their ordinary places, doing extraordinary things, could matter against totalitarianism. 2024. The barn still stands. Blackwell Farm is privately owned now, no longer in family hands. Emily's children sold it in 2003. The new owners, aware of the property's history, have preserved the barn as heritage site. The chute remains functional. Local schools bring students to see it. Historical reenactment groups demonstrate the physics using hay bales and measuring instruments. The Kent Historical Society installed a plaque. On this site, 17th of September 1940, civilian Thomas Blackwell defended his home against enemy forces using improvised tactics, exemplifying British resilience during the nation's darkest hour. The larger lesson: wars are won by armies, navies, air forces, industrial production, strategic leadership, technological innovation. But wars are also psychological contests. Germany in 1940 possessed military superiority over Britain in virtually every measurable category except will to resist, understanding of home terrain, and that peculiar British characteristic, refusing to acknowledge when you're supposed to lose. Thomas Blackwell didn't possess military training, sophisticated weapons, or tactical doctrine. He possessed intimate knowledge of his own property, willingness to use whatever came to hand, refusal to surrender his family's safety to probability mathematics. His 4 minutes didn't defeat the Wehrmacht, but they contributed unmeasurably, infinitesimally, to creating the perception that Britain was more dangerous to invade than reality suggested. Perception shapes strategy. Strategy determines outcomes. Outcomes change history. The chute remains, smooth oak, worn by decades of hay bales, now polished by thousands of visitors running their hands along the surface, trying to imagine September 1940. Trying to imagine being 52 years old, terrified, desperate and refusing, absolutely refusing, to let evil walk unopposed through your barn doors. That refusal, multiplied across 1 million farms, towns, cities and hearts, is why Britain survived. Not because of grand strategy alone, but because of individual moments when ordinary people said, "No, not here, not today, not while I still breathe." Thomas Blackwell's 4 minutes were one such moment. History records thousands of others. Collectively, they added up to survival. Survival added up to victory. Victory added up to freedom. The barn stands as monument to something essential. When you defend what you love, using whatever you have, refusing to accept defeat, sometimes, against all probability, you win. And sometimes that victory starts with something as simple and as stupid and as brilliant as a wooden chute built to slide hay. If this story of British resilience and ingenuity moved you, if you believe that ordinary people doing extraordinary things deserve to be remembered, please subscribe to this channel. We uncover the forgotten heroes of Britain's finest hour, The moments of courage that didn't make the official histories but defined who we were and who we remain. Hit that bell icon to be notified when we share the next story of British determination against impossible odds. And in the comments below, tell us, do you know a story from your family's wartime experience that deserves to be told? Let's preserve these memories together. Because history isn't just dates and battles. It's people like Thomas Blackwell, standing in a barn with a pitchfork, refusing to surrender. That's the Britain we must never forget.